Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. I'm Dr. Megan Callahan, and I've been a pediatric emergency physician for over 15 years at Children's Hospital of Oklahoma in Oklahoma City. I've treated thousands of cases, from routine injuries to complex trauma, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered last month while cleaning out the archives of our medical library. I was researching historical pediatric trauma protocols for a presentation when I found a sealed envelope tucked inside a 1950s medical journal. The envelope was marked Dr. Margaret Henley, personal account, Joan Gay Croft Case. Inside was a handwritten letter, clearly written by an elderly physician, describing what she called the case that haunted my entire career. The letter was dated June 30th, 1987, her final day as a practicing physician. According to hospital records, Dr. Margaret Henley had been a pediatric emergency physician who worked at several hospitals throughout Oklahoma from 1947 until her retirement in 1987 at age 68. She passed away in 2010 at the age of 91. This appears to be her final testimony about a case that had consumed her thoughts for 40 years of medical practice. What follows is Dr. Henley's story, transcribed exactly as she wrote it on her last day of work. My name is Dr. Margaret Henley, and I am writing this account on June 30th, 1987. Today is my final day as a practicing physician. After 40 years of pediatric emergency medicine, I am hanging up my stethoscope and retiring from the profession that has defined my entire adult life. As I pack up my office, I feel compelled to leave a record of the case that has haunted me every single day of my career. The case that changed not just how I practice medicine, but who I am as a person. I was just 28 years old when it happened, working my first position as an attending physician at Woodward General Hospital in Oklahoma. It was April 9th, 1947, and nothing in my medical training could have prepared me for what would unfold over the next 72 hours. Woodward was a quiet community of about 5,000 people, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and medical emergencies were usually predictable. Farm accidents, childhood illnesses, the occasional heart attack. That changed in the span of 3 devastating minutes. At 9:27 p.m. on that April evening, an F5 tornado, the most powerful classification on the Fujita scale, carved a path of destruction directly through the heart of Woodward. The tornado was nearly a mile wide, with winds exceeding 300 miles per hour, and it moved through our town like the hand of God striking down everything in its path. I was at home when the sirens began wailing. Living in Oklahoma, you become accustomed to tornado warnings, but something about this one felt different. The air itself seemed to vibrate with an ominous energy, and the sky had taken on that sickly green color that veteran storm chasers know means business. My phone rang at 9:45 p.m. It was Dr. Robert Matthews, the Chief of Staff at Woodward General. "Margaret, we need you here now," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "The tornado hit us directly. We have dozens of casualties coming in, and we're going to need every doctor we can get." I threw on my clothes and drove through streets that looked like a war zone. Houses were reduced to splinters, cars were overturned and wrapped around telephone poles, and debris was scattered everywhere. The hospital itself had sustained damage. Several windows were blown out, and part of the roof was gone, but the structure was intact enough to function as our emergency treatment center. The scene inside was controlled chaos. Nurses were setting up triage areas in the hallways, volunteers were bringing in stretchers, and the sound of crying children filled the air. Dr. Matthews briefed me quickly as we walked through the emergency department. "We've got at least 40 confirmed injuries so far, and more are coming in, mostly broken bones, lacerations, head trauma. But Margaret," he paused and lowered his voice, "we've also got several children who've been separated from their families. Some parents are still missing, possibly dead. We're going to need to keep these kids comfortable while we try to locate their relatives." The next several hours were a blur of medical activity. I treated a 10-year-old boy with a compound fracture of his left arm, a 6-year-old girl with severe lacerations to her scalp, and twin brothers who had been found unconscious beneath the debris of their collapsed home. It was exhausting, heartbreaking work, but it was also why I had chosen pediatric medicine, to be there for children in their most vulnerable moments. Around 2 a.m., as the initial wave of casualties began to stabilize, Nurse Patricia Collins approached me with a chart in her hands. "Dr. Henley, we have 2 children in room 7 who need your attention. Sisters, ages 4 and 8. They were brought in about an hour ago." I followed Patricia down the hallway to room 7, which we had converted into a makeshift pediatric ward. The room contained 4 beds, and in 2 of them lay the most heartbreaking scene I had encountered that night. The older girl, who appeared to be about 8 years old, was sitting up in bed with a bandage wrapped around her head. She had beautiful dark hair and large, intelligent eyes that seemed far too mature for her age. Despite her obvious injuries, she was alert and was gently stroking the hand of the smaller child in the bed next to her. The younger girl, Joan Gay Croft, according to her chart, was 4 years old with blonde hair and pale skin. She was conscious, but appeared to be in shock. She had a small laceration on her forehead and what looked like bruising on her arms and legs, but nothing that appeared life-threatening. "Hello, girls," I said softly, approaching their beds. "I'm Dr. Henley. How are you feeling?" The older girl, Jerry, according to her chart, looked up at me with those serious eyes. "My head hurts, but Joan won't talk. She hasn't said anything since they brought us here." I pulled up a chair between their beds and began my examination. Jerry had sustained a concussion and needed several stitches in her scalp, but her neurological responses were normal, and she was clearly thinking clearly. Joan's physical injuries were minor. The laceration on her forehead required only 2 stitches, and her bruises, while painful, didn't indicate any internal trauma. But Joan's psychological state was concerning. She was exhibiting classic signs of acute stress reaction. She stared straight ahead without focusing on anything in particular. She didn't respond to verbal commands, and her body was rigid with tension. This was not uncommon in children who had experienced severe trauma, but it required careful monitoring. "Jerry, can you tell me what happened?" I asked gently. The 8-year-old's face crumpled, and she began to cry quietly. The wind came, and our house started shaking. Mama put us under the kitchen table, but then everything went black, and there was this terrible noise. When I woke up, there were men digging us out of the wood and stuff. "What about your parents? Were they with you?" Jerry's crying intensified. "Mama was right next to us under the table, but when the men found us, she wasn't moving. And Papa?" She paused, trying to compose herself. "Papa wasn't even there. I don't know where Papa was." My heart broke for these children. I had already been briefed on their situation by the intake nurse. Their mother, Helen Croft, had been found dead at the scene, killed instantly when the roof of their house collapsed. Joan's stepfather, Jerry's biological father, had been critically injured and was currently in surgery. The prognosis was uncertain. Over the next few hours, I checked on the girls regularly. Jerry was responding well to treatment, and despite her grief, was talking to the nurses and even managed to eat a little bit of soup. Joan, however, remained in her catatonic state. She would accept fluids when they were offered, but she wouldn't speak, wouldn't make eye contact, and showed no interest in her surroundings. This type of psychological trauma response in children was not uncommon after disasters. The human mind, especially a child's mind, sometimes simply shuts down when confronted with experiences too overwhelming to process. The standard treatment was to provide a safe, quiet environment and wait for the child to gradually emerge from the shock. Most children recovered within a few days to a week. But Joan was different. There was something about her stillness that felt deeper than typical trauma response. When I looked into her eyes, I didn't see the glazed expression of shock that I was accustomed to seeing. Instead, I saw what appeared to be a profound sadness, as if she understood exactly what had happened and was choosing not to engage with a world that had become too painful to bear. Around 6 a.m., as the sun was beginning to rise over the devastated town, I was called to attend to other patients. The hospital was still receiving casualties, and there were several children with more serious injuries who needed immediate attention. I asked Nurse Collins to check on Joan and Jerry every hour and to notify me immediately if there were any changes in their condition. At 10:30 a.m., I returned to room 7 to find Jerry sitting up in bed, coloring in a book that one of the volunteers had brought her. She looked up when I entered and managed a small smile. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" I asked. "My head still hurts, but not as much, and I'm worried about Joan. She still won't talk to me." I looked over at Joan's bed. The 4-year-old was lying on her side, facing the wall, in exactly the same position she had been in when I left 4 hours earlier. Her breathing was regular, and she appeared to be awake, but she showed no acknowledgement of my presence. "Joan, honey, it's Dr. Henley," I said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I know you've been through something very scary, but you're safe now. Can you look at me?" There was no response. I gently placed my hand on her shoulder, and she didn't flinch or pull away, but she also didn't turn toward me. It was as if she had withdrawn so completely into herself that the outside world simply didn't exist for her anymore. I spent the next 20 minutes conducting a more thorough neurological examination. Joan's reflexes were normal, her pupils responded appropriately to light, and there were no signs of head trauma beyond the minor laceration on her forehead. Physically, she was fine. Psychologically, however, she remained unreachable. "Dr. Henley," Nurse Collins appeared in the doorway. "There are 2 men here asking about the Croft children. They say they're from St. Mary's Hospital in Oklahoma City, and they're here to transfer the girls." This was not unusual. Woodward General was a small hospital with limited pediatric facilities, and Oklahoma City had much better resources for treating traumatized children. It made sense that arrangements would be made to transfer Joan and Jerry to a facility better equipped to handle their long-term care. "Did they show proper credentials?" I asked. "Yes, they have transfer papers and everything looks official. They're asking specifically about taking both girls." I followed Nurse Collins to the main desk, where 2 men in dark suits were waiting. They appeared to be in their 30s or early 40s, both well-dressed and professional-looking. One was tall and thin with graying hair, and the other was shorter and stockier with a mustache. "Gentlemen, I'm Dr. Henley, the attending pediatrician for the Croft children. I understand you're here to arrange a transfer." The taller man stepped forward and extended his hand. "Dr. Henley, I'm Mr. Anderson, and this is Mr. Webb. We're with the Patient Transport Department at St. Mary's Hospital in Oklahoma City. We've been sent to collect Joan Gay Croft and Jerry Croft for transfer to our pediatric trauma unit." He handed me a manila folder containing what appeared to be official transfer documentation. The paperwork looked legitimate. It had the St. Mary's Hospital letterhead, proper medical terminology, and what appeared to be authentic signatures from physicians in Oklahoma City. "How did you know to come for these specific children?" I asked. "We haven't had time to contact anyone about transfers yet." "Mr. Webb," the shorter man spoke up, "the Red Cross has been coordinating with hospitals throughout the region to identify children who need specialized care. When they learned about the Croft girls' situation, losing their mother and with their father in critical condition, they requested that we bring them to Oklahoma City, where we have better psychiatric support services for traumatized children." This explanation made perfect sense. The Red Cross was indeed coordinating disaster relief efforts throughout Oklahoma, and it was logical that they would want to ensure that orphaned children received the best possible care. "I need to examine their current condition before I can approve any transfer," I said. "Joan, in particular, is experiencing severe psychological trauma. She hasn't spoken since she arrived, and I'm not sure she's stable enough for transport." "Of course, Doctor," Mr. Anderson said. "We understand your concerns, but we have a child psychiatrist waiting at St. Mary's who specializes in trauma cases like this. The sooner we can get Joan into proper treatment, the better her chances of recovery. I couldn't argue with that logic. While I had some experience with pediatric psychology, I was not a specialist, and Joan clearly needed more help than I could provide in our small-town hospital. "Let me go check on them once more, and then we can discuss the transfer details," I said. I returned to room 7, where I found Jerry still coloring and Joan still lying motionless on her side. I sat down between their beds and spoke to both girls. "Jerry, these men are here to take you and Joan to a bigger hospital in Oklahoma City. They have doctors there who specialize in helping children who have been through scary experiences like you have. Do you understand?" Jerry nodded solemnly. "Will they be able to help Joan start talking again?" "I hope so, sweetheart. They have doctors who know all about helping children who are feeling very sad and scared." I turned to Joan. "Joan, honey, can you hear me? We're going to send you somewhere where there are doctors who can help you feel better. You'll be with Jerry, so you won't be alone." Joan's breathing pattern changed slightly, and for a moment, I thought she might be responding to my voice, but she didn't turn around or give any other indication that she had heard me. I returned to the main desk where the 2 men were waiting patiently. "Mr. Anderson, I'm willing to approve the transfer, but I have some conditions. First, Joan is in a very fragile psychological state. She will need constant supervision during transport. Second, I want to be contacted immediately once they arrive at St. Mary's so I can be updated on their condition." "Absolutely, doctor. We completely understand your concerns. We've transported many trauma cases, and we know how to handle children in Joan's condition." "One more thing," I said. "I want to speak directly with the receiving physician at St. Mary's before you leave." Mr. Anderson exchanged a quick glance with Mr. Webb. "I'm afraid Dr. Morrison, the psychiatrist who will be treating the girls, is currently in surgery, but I can assure you that he's expecting them, and we have specific instructions for their care." I hesitated. Something about the exchange of glances between the 2 men had struck me as odd, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what bothered me about it. The paperwork looked legitimate, their explanation was reasonable, and it was certainly in the best interest of both children to get them to a facility with better resources. "All right," I said finally. "Let me help you get them ready for transport." We returned to room 7, where I explained to Jerry that she and Joan would be going to the Oklahoma City hospital. Jerry seemed anxious about leaving, but she understood that it was necessary. Getting Joan ready for transport was more challenging. She remained completely unresponsive, and we had to dress her and prepare her for the journey as if she were catatonic. The 2 men were professional and gentle in their handling of both children. They had brought a wheelchair for Joan and allowed Jerry to walk alongside them. As they prepared to leave, Mr. Anderson turned to me. "Dr. Henley, thank you for taking such good care of these girls. We'll make sure they get the help they need. Please, call me as soon as you arrive in Oklahoma City. I want to know how they're doing." "Of course. We should be there in about 3 hours." I watched from the hospital entrance as they loaded both girls into a dark sedan. Jerry looked back and waved at me through the rear window. Joan was sitting in the back seat next to her, still staring straight ahead, still lost in whatever internal world she had retreated to. The car pulled away, and I returned to my other patients. The hospital was still overwhelmed with tornado victims, and I had dozens of other children who needed my attention. But throughout the rest of that day, I found myself thinking about Joan Gay Croft and wondering if I had made the right decision in allowing her to be transferred. At 6 p.m., nearly 9 hours after the men had left with the girls, I called St. Mary's Hospital in Oklahoma City. "St. Mary's Hospital, how may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with Dr. Morrison in your Pediatric Psychiatry Department. This is Dr. Margaret Henley from Woodward General Hospital regarding 2 children who were transferred to your facility this morning. Please hold while I connect you." After a few minutes, the operator came back on the line. "I'm sorry, Dr. Henley, but we don't have a Dr. Morrison in our psychiatry department. Could you be thinking of a different physician?" A cold feeling began to develop in my stomach. No, I specifically need to check on 2 children who were transferred from Woodward General this morning. Joan Gay Croft, age 4, and Jerry Croft, age 8. They should have arrived around 1 p.m. Let me check our admissions records. There was a long pause. I'm not showing any admissions today for children with those names. Are you sure they were brought to St. Mary's? The cold feeling in my stomach became a full-blown panic. Yes, they were picked up by 2 men who identified themselves as being from your patient transport department. They had official transfer papers with your hospital's letterhead. Dr. Henley, I need to transfer you to our security department immediately. Within an hour, the Oklahoma City Police Department had contacted the Woodward Sheriff's Office, and a full investigation was launched. The transfer papers that the 2 men had shown me were examined by experts and determined to be sophisticated forgeries. St. Mary's Hospital confirmed that they had no record of the men, no knowledge of any planned transfer, and no patients matching the description of Joan and Jerry Croft. The FBI was called in to investigate what was now being treated as a kidnapping case. Agents interviewed me extensively about my interactions with the 2 men, and I provided detailed descriptions of their appearance, their behavior, and everything they had said to me. But as the investigation progressed, disturbing details began to emerge. The most significant was that the 2 men had specifically asked for Joan Gay Croft by name when they arrived at the hospital. They hadn't asked for the Croft children or the tornado victims. They had specifically requested Joan. This suggested that they had known exactly who she was before they arrived at the hospital. In a small town like Woodward, it was possible that word had spread about the children who had lost their mother in the tornado. But the fact that they knew her full name and that they had come prepared with forged documents specifically for her transfer suggested a level of premeditation that was deeply disturbing. The investigation revealed another troubling detail. Jerry Croft had been left behind. Wait, that's not right. Let me clarify what actually happened, because this is where the case becomes truly haunting. The 2 men had arrived at the hospital and specifically asked for Joan Gay Croft. When I had told them that Joan had a sister who was also a patient, they had agreed to take both children. But according to the investigation, their original intention had been to take only Joan. More disturbing still, when agents traced the route that the men would have taken to Oklahoma City, they found Jerry Croft at a gas station about 20 miles outside of Woodward. She was unharmed but terrified. According to her account, the men had stopped at the gas station and told her that they needed to make a phone call. They had taken Joan with them into the station, ostensibly to use the restroom, but they had never come back out. Jerry had waited in the car for over an hour before a gas station attendant noticed her and called the police. When officers arrived, they found no sign of Joan or the 2 men. The car had been abandoned, and later investigation revealed that it had been stolen from a parking lot in Oklahoma City 3 days earlier. Joan Gay Croft had vanished without a trace. The FBI investigation continued for months. They interviewed every person who had been at the hospital that day, examined every piece of evidence, and followed up on hundreds of tips from people who claimed to have seen Joan or the 2 men. But none of the leads panned out. The case generated national attention. Joan's photograph appeared in newspapers across the country, and the FBI added her to their list of missing children. But as months turned into years, the trail grew cold. What haunted me most about the case was not just the fact that Joan had disappeared, but the realization that I had been completely deceived by the 2 men. They had appeared professional, their documentation had looked legitimate, and their explanation had been entirely reasonable. I had acted in what I believed were Joan's best interests, and yet I had unknowingly handed her over to people who had come to the hospital with the specific intention of taking her. The question that tormented me was, why Joan? She was 4 years old, traumatized, and had no family connections that would have made her a target for ordinary kidnapping. Her stepfather, assuming he survived his injuries, had no money or influence that would have made Joan valuable as a ransom victim. The men had clearly known who she was before they arrived at the hospital, which meant they had targeted her specifically. But why? Over the years, I've developed several theories, none of which are entirely satisfactory. The first possibility is that Joan had witnessed something during the tornado that someone wanted to keep secret. Perhaps she had seen something in the chaos and destruction that implicated someone in a crime, and the kidnapping was an attempt to prevent her from eventually telling what she had seen. But this theory has problems. Joan hadn't spoken since arriving at the hospital, and there was no way to know if she would ever recover enough to be a credible witness to anything. The second possibility is that Joan was taken for adoption purposes. In 1947, legal adoption procedures were less stringent than they are today, and there was a black market for healthy young children. Perhaps the two men were working for someone who wanted a daughter and had specifically requested a young girl who fit Joan's description. But this theory also has problems. Why go to such elaborate lengths to forge documents and impersonate hospital personnel when there were legal ways to adopt children, even in 1947? The third possibility, and the one that disturbs me most, is that Joan was taken by someone who had known her before the tornado. Perhaps she had been targeted by someone who had been planning to take her for some time, and the tornado had simply provided the perfect opportunity. The chaos and confusion in the aftermath of the disaster would have made it easy for someone to remove a child from the community without being noticed. But this theory raises the most troubling questions of all. Who would have known Joan well enough to target her specifically? And what did they want with a 4-year-old girl? 23 years later, in 1970, I received a letter that reignited my interest in Joan's case. The letter was postmarked from Denver, Colorado, and contained no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a message typed on what appeared to be an old typewriter. Dr. Henley, you probably don't remember me, but I was one of the children you treated after the Woodward tornado in 1947. I wanted you to know that I'm doing well and that I've never forgotten your kindness during that terrible time. I also wanted you to know that Joan is safe and happy. She doesn't remember much about what happened, which is probably for the best. She has a good family now and has grown up to be a wonderful young woman. Please don't try to find her. Some secrets are better left buried. A grateful patient. The letter was unsigned. I took the letter to the FBI, and they conducted a thorough analysis. The paper was common typing paper available at any office supply store. The typewriter was determined to be an older model, possibly from the 1940s or 1950s, but there were thousands of such machines in use throughout the country. The postmark indicated that the letter had been mailed from Denver, but that didn't necessarily mean the writer was located there. Most significantly, the FBI could find no way to verify whether the letter was genuine or a hoax. The letter claimed to be from one of the children I had treated after the tornado, but it provided no specific details that would have verified the writer's identity. Anyone who had read newspaper accounts of the tornado and Joan's disappearance could have written such a letter. But there was something about the tone of the letter that felt authentic to me. The reference to my kindness felt genuine, and the statement that Joan doesn't remember much about what happened seemed consistent with the psychological trauma she had been experiencing when I last saw her. If the letter was genuine, it suggested that Joan had been taken by people who genuinely cared about her welfare and had provided her with a loving home. But it also meant that she had been living under a false identity for over 2 decades, unaware of her true origins. The FBI investigated the letter, but they were unable to determine its authenticity. The case remained open, but with no new leads to follow, the investigation eventually became inactive. In 1999, more than 50 years after Joan's disappearance, I received a phone call that brought the case back into the spotlight. A reporter from the Oklahoman newspaper told me that they had received an email from a woman claiming to be Joan Gay Croft. The woman said that she had been living under a different name her entire adult life, but had recently learned the truth about her origins. She wanted to meet with the reporter to tell her story. I was contacted because the woman had specifically mentioned my name and had provided details about her medical treatment that only someone who had been there could have known. The woman agreed to meet with the reporter, but at the last minute, she changed her mind. She sent a final email saying that she had decided it was better to leave the past alone, and then she disappeared again. All attempts to trace the email or re-establish contact were unsuccessful. Was it really Joan? I'll never know. But I've never stopped wondering about that little girl who disappeared from my hospital on April 10th, 1947. I've never stopped questioning whether I could have done something differently, whether I should have been more suspicious of the two men, whether I should have insisted on speaking directly with the receiving physician before allowing the transfer. Joan Gay Croft would be 78 years old now if she's still alive. She would have lived an entire lifetime under whatever identity she was given by the people who took her. She might have children and grandchildren who have no idea that their mother or grandmother was once a little girl who survived one of Oklahoma's most devastating tornadoes, only to vanish from a hospital room 3 days later. As I retire today, Joan Gay Croft would be 44 years old. She has lived an entire adult life under whatever identity she was given by the people who took her. She might have children who have no idea that their mother was once a little girl who survived one of Oklahoma's most devastating tornadoes, only to vanish from a hospital room 3 days later. The case officially remains unsolved. The FBI file is still active, though no new leads have emerged in the 20 years since I received that mysterious letter. Joan's disappearance has been featured in true crime magazines and radio programs, but the trail has grown cold. But for me, Joan's case represents something more than just an unsolved mystery. It represents the moment when I learned that evil can present itself in the most reasonable, professional, and trustworthy disguise. The two men who took Joan weren't obviously criminal or threatening. They were polite, well-dressed, and seemingly legitimate. They had documents that looked official, explanations that made sense, and they treated the children gently. Yet they were predators who had come to my hospital with the specific intention of taking a traumatized 4-year-old girl. This experience changed how I practiced medicine for the next 40 years. I became more suspicious, more questioning, more insistent on verifying credentials and procedures. Some colleagues said I became overly protective, and perhaps they were right. But I never again allowed a child to leave my care without personally confirming every detail of their transfer or discharge. Because somewhere out there is a woman who doesn't know that her name was once Joan Gay Croft, that she survived the Woodward tornado of 1947, that she lost her mother and was separated from her sister, and that she disappeared from a hospital room under circumstances that have never been explained. Joan Gay Croft, wherever you are, I hope you're safe, I hope you're happy, and I hope that someday, somehow, we'll finally learn what really happened to you on that April morning in 1947. Some mysteries deserve to be solved, even if it takes a lifetime. I am leaving this account in the hope that future physicians will learn from my experience and perhaps one day help solve the mystery of what happened to Joan Gay Croft. Dr. Margaret Henley, June 30th, 1987. Final day of practice. After reading Dr. Henley's retirement account, I was compelled to research the case myself. Everything she described checks out with historical records. The Woodward tornado of April 9, 1947 was indeed one of the deadliest in Oklahoma history, killing 181 people. Joan Gay Croft was a real 4-year-old girl who disappeared from Woodward General Hospital on April 10, 1947, under the exact circumstances Dr. Henley described. The FBI case file remains open to this day. Joan would be 82 years old now if she's still alive. What strikes me most about Dr. Henley's account is how this single case shaped her entire 40-year career. According to hospital records I found, Dr. Henley indeed implemented some of the strictest child protection protocols in Oklahoma after 1947. She personally verified every transfer, every discharge, every person who came for any child in her care. Her colleagues described her as almost obsessively protective of her young patients, and now I understand why. As a pediatric emergency physician myself, I can't imagine the weight Dr. Henley carried. We make critical decisions every day that affect children's lives, usually with incomplete information and under tremendous pressure. The fact that she was deceived by sophisticated criminals doesn't make her responsible for what happened to Joan, but I understand why she carried that burden for 40 years. The question that haunts me now, just as it haunted Dr. Henley, is, what happened to Joan Gay Croft. The 1970 letter she mentioned suggests that Joan may have survived and lived under a different identity. But without concrete proof, we may never know the truth. What we do know is that somewhere in America, there may be an elderly woman who has no idea that her disappearance as a 4-year-old child launched one of the largest FBI investigations of the 1940s, and that her story has been told and retold by people trying to understand how a child could simply vanish without a trace. Dr. Henley's final words in her retirement letter have stayed with me. Some mysteries deserve to be solved, even if it takes a lifetime. Joan Gay Croft's disappearance remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history, and Dr. Margaret Henley's first-hand account provides the most detailed description of what happened that April morning in 1947. If you're watching this and you know anything about Joan Gay Croft, or if you are Joan Gay Croft, please know that there are people who never stopped caring about what happened to you. Your story matters, and the truth, whatever it is, deserves to be told.